The late afternoon sun streamed through the airport windows as Flight AC 247 prepared for its journey from San Francisco to Toronto. Among the crowd of tired travelers stood Priya Kumar, clutching her boarding pass while balancing a cup of green tea. As a software engineer heading to an important client meeting, she had carefully planned everything about this trip, or so she thought. The boarding process started normally enough. Priya waited patiently in line, watching as people shuffled forward with their bags and children in tow. A businessman in front of her argued about the overhead bin space, while a young couple behind her whispered about their honeymoon plans. Just another typical day at the airport, with its usual mix of excitement and frustration. When her turn came to board, Priya walked down the jet bridge, her rolling carry-on making a rhythmic sound against the metal flooring. She had chosen her favorite navy blue luggage for this trip. Practical, professional, and easy to spot. At least, that's what the sales assistant had promised when she bought it last month. As she made her way down the narrow airplane aisle, Priya noticed how full the flight was. People were already settling in, some struggling with their bags, others helping each other make space. She found her seat in row 23, right above the wing. Perfect for watching the sunset during the 5-hour flight, she thought to herself. Just as she lifted her carry-on to place it in the overhead compartment, a voice behind her made her freeze. "Hey, that's my bag." A man's voice, sharp and accusatory, cut through the usual airplane murmur. Priya turned around to face a tall man in a gray suit, his face flushed with anger. "I'm sorry, but this is definitely my bag," Priya replied calmly, though her heart had started racing. She pointed to the small green ribbon she had tied to the handle, a habit her mother had insisted would help identify her luggage. The man, who later introduced himself as Robert Thompson, stepped closer, his presence intimidating in the confined space. No, I watched you take it from the previous overhead bin. I have important medical samples in there that need special handling." Other passengers began to take notice. Some pulled out their phones, anticipating drama, the kind that usually ended up trending on social media. A young teenager whispered to his mother, "Mom, this is going viral for sure." Priya remained composed, despite feeling her cheeks grow warm. She reached for her baggage claim ticket, tucked safely in her passport holder. "Look, I have my documentation right here. This is my bag. I can even tell you what's inside." Flight attendants noticed the commotion and made their way over. One of them, wearing a name tag that read, "Mai," tried to defuse the situation. "Sir, ma'am, perhaps we can sort this out calmly. Could both of you show us your baggage claim tickets?" But Thompson wasn't interested in a peaceful resolution. His voice grew louder, drawing more attention. "Do you know what happens if those samples are compromised? This is a matter of life and death." His hands gestured wildly, causing several nearby passengers to lean away. What started as a simple misunderstanding was quickly spiraling into something bigger. Other travelers began taking sides, some defending Priya, others sympathizing with Thompson's alleged medical emergency. The atmosphere in the cabin grew tense, like a storm gathering strength. Priya stood her ground, though inside she felt a mix of confusion and frustration. She had faced difficult situations in her tech career before, but nothing quite like this. As she opened her mouth to suggest a solution, she noticed something odd about Thompson's behavior. The way his eyes kept darting to the other passengers' phones, almost as if he was performing for an audience. Little did anyone know that this was just the beginning of a story that would soon take an unexpected turn, revealing layers of deception that no one on Flight AC 247 could have anticipated. The tension in the airplane cabin grew thicker as Robert Thompson continued his tirade about the supposedly stolen bag. Priya's attempts to remain professional were being tested with each passing moment. Around them, the other passengers had become an impromptu audience, their own boarding routines forgotten in the drama unfolding before them. "Listen," Thompson said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Those samples are worth more than your yearly salary. Open the bag right now. He stepped even closer, causing Priya to bump against the armrest of an empty seat. The elderly woman sitting there looked up with concern, her crossword puzzle forgotten. Flight attendant Mai spoke into her handheld radio, her expression carefully neutral. "Captain, we have a situation in row 23. She turned to Thompson, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Sir, if you have medical samples, you should have declared them during check-in. Could you show us the proper documentation?" Thompson's face flickered with something. Was it worry? But it disappeared so quickly that Priya wondered if she had imagined it. He reached into his jacket pocket, fumbling with papers. "Of course I have documentation. But every second we waste here puts the samples at risk." A young doctor seated nearby spoke up, her voice carrying authority despite its softness. "I regularly transport medical samples. They're always clearly labeled and require special handling tags. I don't see any on your bag, sir." She adjusted her glasses, studying Thompson with growing suspicion. More passengers joined the discussion. A college student with bright blue hair pulled up the airline's regulations on her phone. "It says here that medical samples need to be declared and stored in a temperature-controlled compartment." She showed her screen to nearby passengers, who nodded in agreement. Thompson's demeanor suddenly shifted. Instead of answering these points, he pulled out his phone and started recording. "Everyone, look at this. They're preventing critical medical supplies from reaching patients." His voice had taken on a theatrical quality, as if he was performing for an invisible audience. Priya noticed something odd about his behavior. Every time he raised his voice or made dramatic gestures, his eyes would dart to the passengers recording the scene. It was almost like he was making sure they captured his best angles. The situation reached a breaking point when Thompson attempted to grab Priya's bag. "I'll prove it's mine," he declared, reaching for the handle. But as he did so, a small envelope fell from his jacket pocket. The elderly woman with the crossword puzzle noticed it first. "Oh dear, you dropped something," she said, bending to pick it up. Thompson's face drained of color as he tried to snatch it away, but the woman had already glimpsed its contents. "My goodness, these look like script notes." A flight attendant who had been monitoring the situation from nearby stepped closer. "Script notes?" she asked, her eyebrows raised. The elderly woman adjusted her reading glasses and peered at the paper again. But Thompson quickly grabbed it and stuffed it back into his pocket. By now, the captain had been notified, and the head purser arrived at the scene. She was a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect. "Mr. Thompson, Ms. Kumar, please follow me to the front of the aircraft. We need to sort this out before takeoff." As they moved forward, Priya caught fragments of whispered conversations around her. "Did you see how he reacted to those papers? Something's not right here. Poor woman, being accused like that." The young doctor who had spoken up earlier caught Priya's eye and gave her an encouraging nod. The mystery was deepening, and as they reached the front of the plane, Priya couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to this situation than a simple case of mistaken luggage. Thompson's theatrical behavior, the mysterious script notes, his obsession with being recorded, it all pointed to something bigger, something orchestrated. But why would anyone go to such lengths to create drama on an ordinary flight to Toronto? The front of the aircraft had become an impromptu courtroom, with the head purser acting as judge. But what happened next shocked everyone, especially Priya. Two men in plain clothes stood up from their first-class seats, quietly showing their credentials to the flight crew. Air marshals. "Ma'am, please put your hands where we can see them," one of the marshals said, addressing not Thompson, but Priya. Her heart dropped to her stomach as she realized what was happening. The other passengers watched in stunned silence as the marshal continued. "We've received reports of suspicious behavior and possible theft." Thompson's face showed a hint of a smile, quickly masked by an expression of concern. "I tried to handle this quietly," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. The head purser looked uncertain, glancing between the marshal's badges and Priya's bewildered face. "There must be some mistake," Priya said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My bag has my business documents, my laptop. I can prove everything in it belongs to me." She reached for her phone to show her hotel confirmation and meeting details, but one of the marshals stopped her. "Please keep your hands visible," he repeated firmly. The other passengers were now crowding the aisle, phones recording every moment. Someone whispered, but she was the calm one. Another voice added, "This doesn't feel right." The elderly woman with the crossword puzzle spoke up again. "Officers, I saw that man drop some papers. They looked like instructions or a script of some kind." But Thompson quickly interjected, "Those were medical documents, confidential patient information. I couldn't let anyone see them." The young doctor who had questioned Thompson earlier tried to intervene. "As a medical professional, I can tell you that's not how we transport sensitive materials or documents." But her protests were lost in the commotion as more flight attendants arrived to manage the growing crowd of onlookers. Priya found herself being escorted off the plane, the cold metal of handcuffs against her wrists. As she walked down the aisle, she held her head high, even as whispers and camera phones followed her every step. Some passengers looked away uncomfortably, while others seemed troubled by the turn of events. Just before reaching the exit, Priya noticed something odd. Thompson was typing rapidly on his phone, and she caught a glimpse of a message. "Phase 1 complete. Moving to next target." He quickly pocketed the device when he noticed her looking, but that brief moment told her everything she needed to know. This was no random incident. In the jet bridge, away from the crowd, one of the marshals received a radio call. His expression changed slightly as he listened, his eyes darting toward Thompson through the aircraft windows. Priya noticed this subtle shift and felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe someone else was starting to see through this charade. The airport police were waiting at the gate, their presence drawing curious stares from other travelers. As they led Priya away, she heard Thompson's voice behind her, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I hope they return my medical samples before they're ruined." But something in his voice had changed, a note of triumph that seemed out of place for someone supposedly concerned about sensitive medical materials. A few alert passengers noticed it too, including a retired teacher who had been quietly observing everything from her seat near the gate. As Priya was led through the terminal, she remembered her mother's words from years ago. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, like oil and water. Looking back at the plane through the terminal windows, she saw Thompson talking animatedly with his phone held high, clearly filming himself. The young doctor who had spoken up was watching him with narrowed eyes, her own phone now discreetly recording his suspicious behavior. What none of them knew was that in a small office at the airport police station, Detective Laura Chen was already pulling up surveillance footage from other airports, about to uncover a pattern that would turn this entire situation on its head. Detective Laura Chen's office at the airport police station was cluttered with case files and coffee cups, but her mind was crystal clear as she reviewed the security footage. Something about this incident didn't add up, and her 20 years of experience was setting off every alarm bell she had. "Play that section again," she instructed the tech analyst beside her. The screen showed Thompson entering the airport 3 hours before the flight. He was talking on his phone, and thanks to the high-quality cameras, they could clearly read his lips. "Don't worry, this airline's reputation will tank after today." In the interview room down the hall, Priya sat calmly, despite the handcuffs that still bound her wrists. "I've never seen that man before in my life," she explained to the junior officer taking her statement. But something felt off about his behavior. He seemed more interested in creating a scene than finding his supposed medical samples. The young doctor from the flight had insisted on giving her statement too. "I transport medical samples regularly," she explained, showing her hospital ID badge. The documentation he showed was completely wrong. The letterhead, the formatting, everything. "I've filed similar paperwork hundreds of times." Detective Chen's phone buzzed. It was a message from airport security at Los Angeles International. Check incidents from last month. Similar MO, different airline. She quickly pulled up the report and her eyes widened. 3 Asian women travelers, all professionals, all accused of theft by a well-dressed businessman claiming to have urgent medical cargo. The retired teacher, who had witnessed everything at the gate, came forward with her own observation. I used to direct school plays for 30 years, she said, adjusting her reading glasses. That man wasn't distressed. He was performing. Every gesture, every line, it was all rehearsed. Meanwhile, the tech analyst had made another discovery. Detective, look at this. He pulled up Thompson's social media history. Videos of airline incidents, all going viral, all showing different carriers in a bad light. But Thompson himself never appeared in them. He was always behind the camera, stirring up trouble. Back in the interview room, Priya's employer had sent over verification of her business trip details, including email trails and meeting schedules. The junior officer was comparing them with Thompson's story, finding holes big enough to drive a plane through. Call the FBI, Detective Chen instructed her team. This goes beyond a simple airport dispute. She spread out photos from similar incidents across 6 different airports. A pattern emerged. Thompson targeted flights during peak social media hours, always chose professional women traveling alone, and always made sure passengers were recording. The evidence was mounting when another piece of the puzzle fell into place. A customs officer rushed in with a report. We found his real bag, she announced. No medical samples. Just camera equipment and multiple phones. She placed a small notebook on the detective's desk, its pages filled with flight numbers, dates, and social media engagement statistics. In the hallway, the air marshals who had made the arrest were reviewing their own protocols. We received an anonymous tip about a suspicious passenger, one explained. Now it looks like we were manipulated into being part of this show. Detective Chen studied the surveillance footage one more time. Thompson's performance was perfect, too perfect. Like someone who had done this many times before. She picked up her phone to call the airline's corporate security team. We need to talk about a possible corporate sabotage campaign. As the investigation deepened, social media was already buzzing with clips from the incident. But observant viewers were starting to notice inconsistencies in Thompson's story. The young doctor had posted her own video, breaking down why his medical sample claims were impossible. Comment sections filled with similar stories from other travelers. In a quiet moment between interviews, Priya looked out the station window at planes taking off into the evening sky. Her canceled meeting seemed insignificant now, as she realized she had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple luggage dispute. On her phone, she could see Thompson's latest video of the incident going viral. But this time, the comments weren't quite what he had hoped for. The truth began unraveling faster than anyone expected. Detective Chen sat at her desk, surrounded by evidence from airports across the country. Security footage played on multiple screens, showing Thompson in action at different locations. Each incident followed the same pattern, but nobody had connected the dots until now. Look at this, the tech analyst pointed to his screen. He's not just picking random flights. The computer showed a complex spreadsheet of flight routes, passenger demographics, and social media peak times. He's targeting specific routes during high traffic hours when videos are most likely to go viral. In the break room, Priya was finally able to enjoy a cup of tea, her handcuffs long removed. The young doctor from the flight, Dr. Patel, had stayed to provide more evidence. I knew something was wrong when he claimed the samples needed no refrigeration, she explained, stirring her coffee. Even first-year medical students know better than that. The retired teacher had also remained at the station, her crossword puzzle forgotten in her bag. In all my years directing school plays, I've never seen someone so calculated in their performance, she said, watching Thompson's airport videos. See how he positions himself, always making sure other passengers can film from the best angle. Detective Chen's phone rang. It was the FBI's Corporate Crimes Unit. "We found a connection," the agent reported. "Thompson's been receiving payments from a shell company. Guess who owns it?" She paused for effect. Sky High Airways, their biggest competitor. The investigation revealed more shocking details. Thompson wasn't working alone. The tech team uncovered a group chat with other performers. People hired to create dramatic scenes at specific airlines. They called themselves the Disruptors, and their goal was simple: damage competitor airlines' reputations through viral videos. "Got another one," called out a junior officer. He pulled up footage from Chicago O'Hare, showing Thompson in a different suit but pulling the same act. This time, his target had been a businesswoman heading to a tech conference. The script was nearly identical: claims of stolen bags, medical emergencies, all designed to make the airline look bad. Social media teams from various airlines began sending in their data. Every time one of Thompson's videos went viral, their competitor's stock would take a small hit. Over months, these small drops added up to millions in lost revenue. In the surveillance room, analysts watched earlier footage of Thompson arriving at the airport. He spent nearly an hour in the bathroom, not using it, but rehearsing. The mirror captured his practice sessions as he perfected his distressed passenger act, trying different expressions and tones. The elderly woman with the crossword puzzle, who introduced herself as Mrs. Lee, shared her observation with Detective Chen. "When my students used to lie in class, they'd often overact, just like him. The more dramatic they were, the bigger the lie." She pulled out the flight's safety card, where she jotted down notes about Thompson's behavior. Meanwhile, Prida's stolen identity prevention team had arrived. They discovered Thompson had researched her online before the flight, choosing her specifically because of her recent social media posts about traveling for work. "He stalked your LinkedIn profile," they explained. "He knew exactly who to target for maximum impact." The airline's PR team was already working on damage control, but something unexpected was happening. As more people learned about Thompson's scheme, the story changed. Instead of hurting the airline's reputation, people were sharing messages of support. Videos of Thompson's performance were being reposted, but now with frame-by-frame analysis showing his calculated actions. Detective Chen stood at her evidence board, connecting the final strings. Photos of Thompson, snippets of his scripts, bank statements, and social media analytics created a web of deception that had finally been exposed. "It's not just about the viral videos," she explained to her team. "It's corporate sabotage disguised as passenger drama." As evening fell, Priya watched more planes take off through the station window. Her phone buzzed with messages from other women who'd encountered Thompson at different airports. They were all connecting now, sharing their stories, turning his campaign of deception into something he never expected: a movement for truth in the age of viral videos. The airport police station had transformed into a command center. Detective Chen stood before a group of FBI agents, airline security personnel, and cybercrime specialists. On the wall behind her, a map showed red dots marking Thompson's previous incidents across the country. It was time to end his operation once and for all. "Our intel suggests he's planning another incident this weekend," Detective Chen explained, pointing to flight schedules. "This time, we'll be ready." The team had spent days preparing their trap, making sure every detail was perfect. Priya had volunteered to help, despite everything she'd been through. "I want to stop this from happening to anyone else," she told the planning team. Her tech background proved invaluable as they set up their operation. The young doctor, Dr. Patel, had also joined the effort. "I've contacted medical boards across the country," she reported. "They're all issuing statements about proper sample transportation. His medical emergency story won't work anymore." Mrs. Lee, the retired teacher, sat in the corner, still taking notes. "You know what's interesting?" she mused, looking up from her notebook. "In all my years of teaching, the students who caused the most trouble always got caught because they couldn't resist bragging about it." As if on cue, the tech analyst called everyone over. "Look at this," he said, pointing to his screen. Thompson had just posted a cryptic message on his private social media. "Big show coming this weekend. Time to make history." The team's plan was clever in its simplicity. They had leaked information about a high-profile tech executive taking a specific flight. In reality, the seat would be occupied by an undercover agent. They knew Thompson couldn't resist such a perfect target. The airline's security team had installed new high-definition cameras throughout the terminal. "We'll catch every move he makes," the head of security explained. "From the moment he enters the airport until we make the arrest." In the surveillance room, Mrs. Lee helped identify subtle acting tells she'd learned from years of directing school plays. "Watch for his rehearsal spots," she advised. "Performers always need a quiet place to practice their lines." The cyber team had another breakthrough. "We've traced his online network," announced the lead analyst. "He's part of a whole group calling themselves the Disruptors. They're like social media mercenaries, hired to create chaos for competing companies." As Saturday approached, the tension in the command center grew. Priya helped brief the flight crew who would be on board. "Remember," she told them, "he feeds off attention. The bigger the audience, the more dramatic he becomes." Dr. Patel prepared a detailed medical brief debunking every possible scenario Thompson might try. "No matter what kind of medical emergency he claims," she explained, "we'll have immediate proof it's fake." The tech team monitored Thompson's digital footprint. They watched as he researched his target, planned his route, and even practiced his lines in front of his webcam. What he didn't know was that every keystroke was being recorded. On Friday night, Detective Chen gathered everyone for a final briefing. "Tomorrow isn't just about catching one person," she said. "It's about exposing a whole new kind of corporate sabotage. Everyone knows their roles." The undercover team went through their preparations. Flight attendants reviewed their parts. Gate agents studied their cues. Even the coffee shop staff near the gate had been briefed. Every detail mattered. That evening, Priya stood at the airport window, watching planes land and take off in the dying light. Her phone buzzed with messages from other women Thompson had targeted, all offering support and encouragement for tomorrow's operation. In her hotel room, Mrs. Lee finished her last crossword puzzle of the night. 5 letters, word for justice, finally served. She mumbled to herself, smiling as she wrote "peace" in the boxes. As midnight approached, Detective Chen checked the surveillance feeds one last time. Everything was in place. Tomorrow, Thompson would walk into the airport thinking he was about to create another viral moment. Instead, he was walking into a trap months in the making, one that would expose not just his deception, but an entire underground industry of corporate sabotage. Sunday morning arrived with a quiet buzz of anticipation at the airport. Thompson walked through the terminal doors at exactly 7:15 a.m., right on schedule. He didn't notice the plainclothes officers sipping coffee nearby, or the extra security cameras tracking his movement, or even Mrs. Lee pretending to work on her crossword puzzle near the check-in counter. Detective Chen watched the monitors as Thompson followed his usual routine, checking his reflection in the windows, adjusting his tie, rehearsing his lines in a quiet corner. But today was different. Today, every single one of his practiced moves was being recorded from multiple angles. "Target is approaching Gate B7, crackled the radio. The undercover agent, posing as a tech executive, was already in position, typing on her laptop. Thompson took his seat nearby, just as the team had predicted. Right on cue, he started his phone recording. What happened next wasn't part of Thompson's script. Dr. Patel walked past, loudly discussing proper medical sample transportation protocols with another doctor. "Yes, all samples must have temperature logging devices," she said clearly. "And those red authorization tags are mandatory now." Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The team watched as he pulled out his phone, probably to check his backup plans. But the cyber team had already made sure his entire Disruptors chat group was offline. The gate agent called for boarding, and Thompson made his move. He approached the undercover agent, following his usual pattern. "Excuse me, but I believe you have my bag," he began his rehearsed line. "Oh, really?" the agent replied, pressing a hidden button that signaled the team. "Would this be the same bag you claimed last week in Chicago? Or maybe the one from Denver 3 weeks ago?" Thompson's face froze. Behind him, Preya emerged from the coffee shop. "Or perhaps it's the bag you accused me of stealing." She held up her phone, showing a live stream of their conversation going viral, but not in the way Thompson had planned. The trap was sprung. FBI agents appeared from all directions. "Mr. Thompson," Detective Chen announced, walking up with her badge displayed, "we have some questions about your employment with Sky High Airways' shadow operation." As the agents led Thompson away, Mrs. Lee finally completed her crossword puzzle. The last clue read, "Justice served in 7 acts." She smiled as she wrote, "XPOZ'd" in the boxes. Back at the police station, the evidence was overwhelming. The cyber team had uncovered everything: bank transfers, secret messaging groups, training videos for other disruptors. Thompson's arrest was just the beginning. The airline's CEO personally apologized to Preya and all the other women Thompson had targeted. But Preya had a better idea than just accepting the apology. "Let's turn this into something positive," she suggested. 6 months later, Preya stood at a podium, addressing a conference room full of airline executives and security experts. Behind her, a screen showed the new passenger protection system she had helped develop, using AI to identify potential troublemakers before they could cause problems. Dr. Patel had implemented new medical transport verification protocols across all airlines. Mrs. Lee was consulting with airport security, teaching them to spot signs of rehearsed behavior. Detective Chen was training other police departments to handle similar cases of corporate sabotage. The disruptors' network was completely dismantled. Thompson and his colleagues faced serious charges, and Sky High Airways was under federal investigation. But more importantly, their scheme had backfired completely. Instead of damaging airlines' reputations, they had brought the industry together to protect passengers. 1 year after the incident, Preya returned to that same airport gate. This time, she wasn't alone. Dozens of other travelers who had been targeted by Thompson's group joined her. They were there to launch a passenger advocacy group, turning their negative experiences into positive change. As they gathered for a photo, Mrs. Lee pulled out one last crossword puzzle. "Look at this," she said, showing everyone the final clue. What turns victims into victors? The answer was simple: truth. That evening, as flights took off into the sunset, the airport felt different. Screens displayed new security measures, help desks were staffed with trained observers, and passengers moved through the terminals with more confidence. What Thompson had intended as a tool for chaos had instead created a community dedicated to making air travel safer for everyone. Somewhere over the Pacific, a plane carried Preya to her rescheduled business meeting. But now she had 2 presentations, one for her clients, and one about how a single act of deception led to the biggest reform in airline passenger protection history.